This is a playlist and a video in which we take all sorts of grammatical and conversational concepts and skills and use them all together within a flowing context to practice them all together in a realistic situation. So if you need more focused studying into each concept or skill, you can watch individual videos made for each of them. Okay, so let's start today's conversation. A is going to start today's conversation. A and B will be having a conversation, and A will start the conversation by asking B, is raising a fox hard? Okay, so you can see that I wrote English words. I used English words to write an English sentence, but I wrote it in a way that fits Korean sentiment and Korean speech better. What I mean by that, in specific in this case, is in Korean, you do not use the word have when you're modifying a pet. So you don't say I have a dog, I have a cat, I have a fox. You would say I raise a cat, dog, or fox when you're talking about any kind of pet. Because if you do use the verb have to modify a pet, the nuance sounds like you are thinking of that pet as a non-living object. So that's not how you want it to sound, right? So we're going to use the verb raise instead. And of course, you don't have to use it in a literal sense. You don't always necessarily have to use it in a literal sense as a way of indicating that you are taking a baby and raising it into its adult state. Of course, that could be the case sometimes, depending on context, but not necessarily always. Sometimes people can simply just use it as a way of saying have. So instead of saying I have a cat, I have a dog, say I raise a dog, I raise a cat, regardless of the age of your cat or dog or any kind of pet. Okay, so we're going to use the verb raise, but I am going to change it into a gerund. In other words, I am going to attach ing behind a verb raise and now give it noun properties. So even though raise is a verb, if I give it ing, I can use it as a noun. So in other words, I formed a gerund, a word that was given, that used to be a verb, but was given noun properties by being given ing. So you can do something that is exactly the same in Korean too. So how you would do it is, first you would place the display form of the verb that you're using. In this case, 키우다, raise. So what is a display form? A form of a verb or adjective that ends with 다 at the end. In other words, a form that I cannot actually use. That's why I call them display forms. They are not for actual usage. They are only to be displayed on the dictionary. So I should never use, well, of course, except for very tailored and rare situations, I should not use a display form. So I took a verb, raise, 키우다. What I'm going to do is, in order to form a gerund, I'm going to erase 다 because I'm not going to use a display form, and I'm simply going to replace it with 는 거. 키우는 거. 키우는 거. So in that sense, 는 거 will be the equivalent of ing in the sense that you can attach it behind a verb, so now you can use it as a noun. So we're going to say 키우는 거, 키우는 거, 키우는 거. and now it's no longer the verb raise, now it's the noun raising. Okay, so a gerund, in other words. So, of course, we first have to omit and then start translating, right? So, of course, no is, do not take into consideration is, am, was, were, are, and do not take into consideration us and thus. You don't use articles, us and thus, in front of a noun in Korean. Of course, technically speaking, you can do it, but it sounds extremely poetic. And what is always the focus? Always the focus is to escape poetic and soldier Korean, because 97% to 99% are naturally led to learn poetic and soldier Korean. Okay. So, now I said I'm going to take a verb raise, but I formed a gerund with it, which means that now I can use it as a noun. So, in this case, only a noun, well, not only in this case, only a noun can be a subject. So now I can use it as a subject because it's a noun. But raise used to be a verb. And a verb can modify an object. What are you raising? What do you raise? You raise a fox. So when you take a verb and make it into a noun through forming a gerund, through giving it ing, well, always keep the object that the original verb modifies, and so that they can stay together and go to the same position, in this case, the subject position. Okay, so we have a big bulky subject. Raising fox will altogether be the subject. And then we're going to use a predicative adjective, hard. But always, you can't just directly translate a word because each and every word is a version of that translation. They are all a little bit different to one another because they have their own unique nuance to them. So I'm going to use a version of hard. And the display form of it will look like 힘들다. 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 But once again, it's a display form. It ends with ta. I cannot use it. I have to change it into some kind of an actual form depending on the situation or my purpose. So, this version of hard is a very specific version, just like any other any other adjective usually. It's a version of hard, but the essence of its nuance is that it has to be hard in a way that is physically and mentally exhausting. So it automatically includes that nuance. Physically and mentally exhausting. Okay, so I'm going to erase ta, of course. Well, actually, no. I want to use this word hard, but of course I cannot use it as its display form. I need to change it into its actual form, present tense. So if I want to conjugate a word, of course I use the word conjugate in a little bit of a different way compared to its definition, technical definition, because conjugation, the definition of it means verbs changing form, depending on the situation. Well, in Korean, and how I use the word when explaining Korean, I will use it as a way of indicating verbs and adjectives. Verbs and adjectives, changing form accordingly to the situation. Okay, so if I'm going to conjugate the display form of this adjective hard into an actual form, present tense, then I have to follow a very specific set of rules, which I call conjugation route number 1. So, there are a couple of conjugation routes. What I mean by conjugation route, I'll put it this way. It's a set of rules that will show you the route, the path that you can go on to navigate yourself so that you can start from a display form but eventually get to an actual form that you want to use. Okay, so now which conjugation route are you going to apply? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Well, that depends on the ending, the conjugation form, in other words, or in other words, the grammar form that you want to use. And the ending, the conjugation form for actual form present tense would be yo. Okay, so yo is an ending that belongs to conjugation route number 1, which means that I have to apply the rules within conjugation route number 1 to conjugate a display form of a verb or adjective into its actual form, present tense. To change, for example, run into run, not ran. For example, sit into sit. For example, quiet into quiet. For example, light into light. For example, heavy into heavy. Okay, so I have to follow the rules within conjugation route number 1, and the rules are: if you have a display form that ends with the L or R consonant, once ta is erased, like we have right now, 힘들다. Once again, this is a display form. This is the display form of an adjective that means that could be translated as hard, but automatically carries the nuance of hard in a way that is mentally and physically exhausting. So, I have a display form that ends with the L or R consonant once ta is erased. So, in this case, I have to apply a 3-step formula. Step number 1, erase ta, which I already did, by the way. Step number 2, I'm going to place something that I call an irregular middle section. And it's going to be a or all. What is an irregular middle section? Something that looks very irregular, that is placed in the middle of the display form and the ending that you're trying to get to. So that's why, this is exactly why you have to have an understanding on routes. Because I explained a route, a conjugation route, as a route that you have to go on to navigate yourself and get to the ending that you want to use. In other words, get through the irregular middle section. So there's something in the middle, so you have to know how to navigate yourself through that irregular middle section and get to the finish line. Okay, so in this case, the irregular middle section will look like a or all. And the arbiter, the deciding factor that decides whether it's going to be a or all, is always going to be the vowel that came right before this consonant. The vowel that came right before this consonant. In this case, it's U. Now the reason why this is the arbiter that decides whether it's going to be a or all is because there are 21 vowels in Korean. And if this vowel is either a, ya, o, or yo, if it's one of these 4 vowels, then the irregular middle section will look like a, but it's not. It's not a, it's not ya, it's not o, and it's not yo either. So, in other words, it's one of the other 17 vowels. So if it's one of the other 17 vowels, then it will look like all. So that's exactly what I'm going to place in the middle. And if I do so, now this L will be changed into an R sound because this consonant can sometimes sound like L but R as well. The reason why it sounded like L was because it was placed in front of a consonant originally, but now it's in front of a vowel. So in that case, it will have a sound that is a little bit closer to R. Of course, not exactly the R in English. Okay, so 힘들어, 힘들어. Okay, so now, according to step number 3, now I can attach the conjugation form, the ending in other words that I want to use. So, now all together, now we have the actual form, present tense of hard. 힘들어요, 힘들어요, 힘들어요. So once again, you can see that there's something in the middle between the display form, the starting point, the starting line, and the ending, the conjugation form, the finish line. That's why I call it irregular middle section, because it will sometimes look like all, sometimes look like a, and sometimes even look like not something that is not a or all, something completely different. So that's why, in order to navigate through this irregular middle section, you have to know the route to get through the irregular middle section. So that's what I mean by conjugation route. And there's conjugation route number 1, conjugation route number 2. You sometimes have to go on different paths to navigate yourself, depending on which ending, which conjugation form you're using. And 요, which is the ending, the conjugation form, the grammar form, in other words, for actual form present tense, belongs to conjugation route number 1. That's why I applied the rules within conjugation route number 1 that you would apply when you have a display form that ends with the L or R consonant once ta is erased. Okay, so now I have an actual form in present tense that I can actually use. So, once again, we have a big bulky subject. So, now, in Korean, the general theme is the object comes first and the verb comes last. So, now we're taking raising and fox all together into a subject position. So in some sense, we're going to look at it as one subject, but still, if you break it down, it still came from something that is originally a verb and originally an object. So this general grammatical theme will apply in between raising and fox as well. So even though they will all together be a subject, the subject, fox will come first, raising will come last. So let's first take care of the subject. So fox is 여우. 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 Fox. And then we know how to say raising, right? We know how to form a gerund. 키우는 거. 키우는 거. Raising. Okay, so 여우 키우는 거. Raising a fox. And then I'm going to ask, well, is it hard? So, we know how to say hard, but in its actual form, right? Because I'm not going to use a display form. 힘들어요. Hard, a version of hard that intrinsically carries the nuance of hard in a way that is mentally and physically exhausting. So, and plus, in order to clearly indicate that this is not a statement, this is not a declarative sentence, but rather a question, I'm going to raise my tone at the very end, at the very last syllable, that is. When speaking and when writing or texting, I'm going to place a question mark at the end. So altogether, if A says 여우 키우는 거 힘들어요, 여우 키우는 거 힘들어요? 여우 키우는 거 힘들어요? then that would be the equivalent of A saying, is raising a fox hard? As a way of saying, is, well, having a fox. So living with the fox, taking care of a fox, looking after a fox, being its family. Hard, but of course, once again, a very specific version of hard that includes the nuance, hard in a physically and mentally exhausting way. So I'm not saying this in a pessimistic way. Of course, we love the fox, but of course, raising a baby and also looking after a fox or a dog or a cat requires a lot of work. So that's why we can use this version, not in a necessarily negative or pessimistic way. Okay, so 여우 키우는 거 힘들어요? Okay, now let's give B a chance to answer this question. Now B is going to answer this question by saying it is similar, but in Korean, the position that will modify similar will be with. It is similar with raising a dog. Okay, so just because we have all the pieces does not mean that we can start translating, right? Because we have to take into consideration the context, and then based on the context, omit, and then with the words that we have left, then translate. Okay, so anything that is too obvious according to the context will be omitted. That's the general theme that you always have to be mindful of. So, what does it denote? Well, it indicates, raising a fox. So, it is already too obvious. Of course, I'm talking about raising a fox. That was your question. So, and plus no, is, am, was, were, are. And then we know that we don't use articles, us and thus, in front of nouns in Korean, right? You could do it, but it's a poetic trap. It will make you sound extremely poetic. Okay, so we know that if we're going to form a gerund, the word, the verb, the word that was originally a verb, we have to take a look at the word that original verb was modifying. Dog. What do you raise? What are we talking about raising? A dog. So altogether, when you're forming a gerund, take the word that was the object that the original verb was modifying together and take them into the same position. So in this case, we have with something. Now, supplementary information. What I call supplementary information, of course, we can get into more detailed technical explanations, but for now, I will just put it as because of something, with something, or like something. Those would be the typical examples of supplementary information. So we have with something, with raising a dog. Once again, a dog will be, the dog is going to be looked at as part of raising because it's a word that used to be the object of a word that used to be originally a verb. So look at them as a part of one another. So that's why with something qualifies as supplementary information. And we have a predicative adjective similar. So we have supplementary information and we have a predicative adjective. Okay, so of course, according to the grammatical flow, supplementary information first, predicative adjective last. Okay, so we're going to say with plus noun, raising. Okay, now there are 3 ways of doing it. In large. Method number 1 is to attach 이랑 or 랑 behind the noun that you're using. So unlike in English, raising will come first and with will go behind. So whatever noun comes behind with, the order between the noun and with will always be reversed. So if you want to say, I came with a friend, then it's friend with. If you want to say, I sleep with my cat, it's going to be cat with. So place the noun first, and then depending on whether that noun ends with a consonant or vowel, attach 이랑 or 랑, and they will be the equivalent of with. Okay, I'll be right back after a sip of water. Okay, so this is method number 1. Method number 2 would be, this time, regardless of the pronunciation of the noun, you can always attach 하고, 하고, 하고. Okay, so these are the two methods that you can actually use. In other words, the two methods that are not poetic traps. Well, already my speech sounds quite ominous, doesn't it? Because I'm about to show you the poetic trap, which is method number 3. Method number 3 would be to attach 과 or 와. Okay, now this is very widespread. Now, it's a poetic trap. So it's not technically wrong. There's nothing technically or maybe even legally wrong with using method number 3. However, it makes you sound extremely poetic. So, what I mean by poetic, for example, let's say I'm going to say the same thing. I'm going to say it in a natural way and then I'll say it in a poetic way. Let's say someone asks me, let's say I'm going to say something along the lines of, I can't go right now. For whatever reason, let's say I want to go somewhere but I can't. So I'm going to say, I can't go right now. Well, technically, basically, I can convey the same message but in a very extremely eerily poetic way. I can also say, destiny seems to be presenting me with this journey. However, I cannot dive into this river of adventure at the moment. So, well, basically, if you look at the core, I'm basically conveying the same message. The fact that I can't go right now. But I said it in an extremely poetic way. So this is what method number 3 sounds like. So in an everyday life normal conversation, you do not use method number 3. Of course, there are very tailored situations in which you could use number 3, but that's a whole nother topic. That's something that you have to learn. However, what I'm saying is, the bottom line is, in everyday life normal conversations, you do not use method number 3. Okay, so you could also ask the question, then what's the difference between method number 1 and 2? Well, I would say the difference between the two is not significant. The gap between the two is not wide when it comes to their, let's say, unique trait or nature. However, if I have to put my finger on some kind of a difference, I would say number 2 has a little bit of a more extra casual tone to it. But number 1 and number 2 are always safe options to use in most situations. Okay, so now, what is the noun that I'm trying to use? Place behind with. It's raising dog. So once again, dog comes first, raising comes last. So, dog would be 강아지. 강아지. And then we know how to say raising, right? 키우는 거. 강아지 키우는 거. So, this is what I am trying to place with. So, it ends with a vowel at the end. A vowel. So I'm going to attach 랑 behind it as the equivalent of with. 랑. So altogether, if I say 강아지 키우는 거랑, then it means with raising a dog. Okay. So that's how I will start the sentence in Korean. With dog. Now before we move on, I'll explain something about dog. Now technically speaking, when it comes to technical definition, 강아지 actually means puppy. So a dog, of course, a puppy that has not yet fully grown into its adult state. However, now that is technically the definition, but when people actually speak in actual conversations, they do not use this word in a literal sense. They don't use this word only necessarily to indicate a puppy that has not fully yet grown into its adult state. They just use it as a way of indicating, referring to all dogs at all ages. Now the sentiment behind it is, well, what is a dog? A dog is cute, like when they were puppies. So dogs are cute, well, no matter what their age is, like when they were puppies. So that sentiment was infused into the way people use this word. Okay, 강아지, so I'm going to use it as dog. And then we know how to say raising, right? Sorry. 키우는 거. Raising. And then, once again, in Korean, you're always going to use with when you're using the adjective similar. And we know how to say similar, right? We're going to use method number 1. I could have used method number 2 as well if I wanted to, just to clarify. Because method number 1 and 2 are not poetic traps. Method number 3 is a poetic trap. So, if I say 강아지 키우는 거랑, as we went over earlier, just a little while ago, now we have with raising a dog. And then I want to use the predicative adjective similar, but once again, I cannot use its display form. So I need to conjugate it into its actual form, present tense. So if I want to use the ending, the grammar form, the conjugation form, in other words, that indicates actual form, present tense. Well, that belongs to conjugation route number 1, so I will revisit conjugation route number 1. So once again, I am trying to use the ending 요, which is used to indicate actual form, present tense. So in this case, if I'm going to use the adjective similar, I am looking at a situation where a display form 비슷하다 비슷하다, but once again, it's a display form. I'm looking at a situation where a display form ends with the syllable ha once ta is erased. It ends with the syllable ha. Okay, so in this case, we are going to apply a 3-step formula, which consists of step number 1, erasing ta. We already did that. Step number 2, we're going to change the ha syllable into a he syllable. So according to step number 2, I'm going to say 비슷해. 비슷해. And then step number 3, what I'm going to do is now I am going to attach the conjugation form the ending, in other words, the grammar form, in other words, behind everything. Okay, so all together, if I say 비슷해요, 비슷해요, 비슷해요. Now, I no longer have the display form of similar. Now I have an actual form in its present tense so that I can use it in an actual sentence. Okay, so... Oops. Sorry about that. So, since this is supposed to be an actual conversation between actual people within an actual situation, I need an actual form. So, all together, I am going to say 비슷해요. I'm going to use its actual form. 비슷해요. And that would be the predicative adjective similar. So, all together, if B is going to say, it is similar with raising a dog. Of course, it means raising a fox. Then B is going to say in Korean, 강아지 키우는 거랑 비슷해요. 강아지 키우는 거랑 비슷해요. 강아지 키우는 거랑 비슷해요. And that would be, well, the equivalent of B saying it is similar with raising a dog as a way of saying it's similar to having a dog.